The next big geomagnetic storm possesses risk to modern man, and FEMA is preparing for it. Scientists are concerned about the next significant space weather event, which begins at the Sun in the center of our solar system. Severe space weather occurs less frequently than traditional weather on Earth, but can be more destructive in nature, Zero Hedge reports. The Sun is now headed towards a solar minimum, forecasted to arrive in 2019, as the Sun changes over from solar cycle 24 to solar cycle 25. The Sun goes through 11-year cycles during which solar activity increases and decreases. Tracking sunspot activity dates back to the start of the first solar cycle in 1755. Today, simple sketching and counting of sunspot numbers have given way to land-based and space-based technologies that continuously monitor the Sun. Scientists have discovered that intense activity such as sunspots and solar flares generally subside during a solar minimum. Dean Presnell of NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland, said, during a solar minimum, that does not mean the Sun becomes dull. He said solar activity simply changes. For instance, Pensel warned, quote, during a solar minimum, we can see the development of long-lived coronal holes, end quote. Coronal holes are large regions of the Sun's atmosphere where the Sun's magnetic fields open up and allow streams of solar particles known as coronal mass ejections, or CMEs for short, to escape the Sun as fast solar wind. If the coronal hole is Earth-facing, then electrically charged particles from the Sun slam into Earth's magnetic field and cause intense electromagnetic storms around the planet. The impact of these particles on the electronic infrastructure, that is, of course, our electrical system, the infrastructure underlying modern industrial civilization, can be devastating, said the Financial Times. CMEs disrupt GPSs, satellites, and astronauts currently in space. Even airline crew and passengers get a markedly higher dose of radiation during solar storms, especially during polar crossings, transoceanic flights. And a repeat of the most significant solar storm on record, the 1859 Carrington superflare, would cost trillions of dollars in damage as power grids, communication networks, and electronic equipment worldwide would be knocked out. Some scientists believe that Earth is due for a severe space weather event that could send civilization temporarily into reverse. Another incident occurred in 1989 when an Earth-facing CME rocked the planet, producing a surge in voltage that caused Hydro-Quebec power grid in Canada to collapse, leaving millions of people without electricity. Quote, during a big geomagnetic storm in 2003, a Japanese scientific satellite was lost, and 10% of the world's satellite fleet suffered malfunctions, end quote, said Professor Richard Horne of the British Antarctic Survey. Quote, today we have around 1,500 satellites in orbit, with thousands more due to be launched in the next few years, end quote. Professor Horne adds, quote, people are trying to use more commercial off-the-shelf components rather than components made to operate in space, and many systems have not been tested in a major storm, so there's a lot of uncertainty about what might happen, end quote. A recent space weather event in late April 2017 allegedly knocked out power grids across the entire country in one simultaneous fashion. San Francisco, New York, and Los Angeles were the three main areas affected. Each region experienced challenges or shutdowns in basic infrastructure such as communications networks and mass transportation. An unfortunate coincidence of adverse space and Earth weather came in September 2017, when space storms disrupted shortwave radios for hours, preventing emergency response to hurricanes tearing apart the Caribbean. Quote, the Sun's been very quiet for the last 10 years, It reminds people not to be complacent, end quote, said Mike Hapgood, head of space weather at the UK Rutherford Appleton Laboratory. Scientists tell the Financial Times that satellites can monitor potentially troublesome activity on the sun days ahead of a possible eruption, forecasting the path and effects of the actual CME. Well, that is very difficult. If the CME is Earth-facing, it takes about 24 hours to arrive. So when the next big solar flare comes racing towards Earth, government officials do not have enough time to prepare the nation or even the world for impact. It would be devastating. According to Professor Holm, according to him, the most notable satellite in short-term space weather forecasting today is the U.S. Deep Space Climate Observatory, or DSCOVR for short, launched in low Earth orbit, LEO, in 2015. LEO, low Earth orbit. From this tactical position about 1 million miles from Earth, DSCOVR, the U.S. Deep Space Climate Observatory, provides an early warning of about 1 hour before impact, just 1 hour. In late 2016, the Obama administration quietly passed an executive order titled, quote, "Coordinating Efforts to Prepare the Nation for Space Weather Events," end quote, which prepares the fragile nation for economic collapse from a space weather event. The mainstream media, for a good reason, were not allowed to cover the passage of this executive order because it would cause too much panic among the American people. When the next significant solar event strikes, most will not be prepared, not even government. Because, as we said, the early warnings would only be for 1 hour before the impact. This is on Newsomnia, and I'll leave a link below for you for this.